What's that? Another PC build, you say? Good heavens, this is an ITX rig and, well, it's not put together yet, but it will be. And I chose an ITX form factor because, well, it's gonna save money on shipping because we're giving this thing away. So this video is sponsored by WD Black, and we're gonna be talking quite a bit in this one about the SN770. This here is an ultra-fast Gen 4 NVMe SSD. We'll show you the speeds later on in the video, but for now, we need to actually build this thing, and before we do that, I wanna talk about the components going in here. This tiny little Silverstone case. It's really, really small. First, I want to introduce the star of the show. Again, that is the WD Black SN770. This again is an NVMe SSD capable of sequential reads of up to 5150 megabytes per second. That's 5,150 megabytes per second, a 40% jump, mind you, over its predecessor, the SN750. Capacities range from 250 gigabytes up to 2 terabytes, but we've opted for the 1 terabyte sweet spot for this $1,200 to $1,300-ish build. The SN770 also comes packed with extra features as well that sets it apart from the competition in this space. You'll find things like the WD Black dashboard for monitoring drive health and enabling game mode. Games will load faster and the entire OS will feel a lot snappier in everyday tasks. And best of all, you'll enjoy a 5-year limited warranty for peace of mind throughout its life. Endurance for this 1 terabyte model is rated at 600 terabytes written, which means in theory you could write over the entire capacity of this thing 600 times before it kicked the can. Sometimes you'll get even more mileage than that. And I love that WD Black is transparent with its product lifespans. Now, to generalize a bit, there are a lot of things I really like about NVMe SSDs. Not only their speeds, but also how easy they are to install. They don't require any wiring, it keeps things super clean behind the motherboard tray especially, and they take only seconds to connect. Moving on, we've got another important part of this build, the Ryzen 5 5600X. It's important we went with Zen 3 here because it supports PCIe 4.0 so we can extract the full potential out of our SN770. With its 6 cores and 12 threads, it's kind of a no-brainer for a compact build like this one. And we're going to be pairing it with a B550i Aorus Pro AX. Again, ITX motherboard, we kind of need that for the case we're using. Speaking of, meet the SG13 from Silverstone. It's a very compact ITX case, of course. Got great ventilation up front. You also get ventilation around the sides and the rear for exhaust for our graphics card as well as our power supply. This wouldn't be a proper ITX build without Corsair Vengeance LPX DDR4, 16 gigs here. Ooh, no, I take that back. This is 16 gigs per module, so 32 gigs. Oh well. And the last few components, our power supply. This is actually a B-stock EVGA 500 watt unit, which is going to be plenty for the system. I know you're thinking to yourself, well, Greg, Ryzen 5 5600X, I mean, yeah, 6 cores, 12 threads, you know, 65 watt TDP, but it's a pretty powerful CPU, and I think a 500 watt unit's cutting it kind of close. Absolutely not, my friends. You'll be surprised how far a 500 watt will get you. We're going to be pairing this with a 5700 XT. This is the reference model, so to speak, from AMD, so it is the blower style card. However, I think it will benefit us, and seeing as though we're using a very compact case, to use the blower reference model. So 500 watt unit, right? 5600X. 5700 XT, it's gonna work. I've done it before. It works, okay? The system overall under load should be in the 300 watt, 350 watt range at the most, even if you're like heavy overclocking, so it's plenty, no problem. I'm kind of worried about cable management space though. Now to kick things off, we're gonna need our motherboard and of course our CPU. We're gonna lift the socket lever here and drop our 5600X right on in. Do mind that you might need to update your motherboard's BIOS before throwing in a Zen 3 CPU. If your motherboard also supports something like QFlash, you can update the BIOS even without having an already compatible CPU installed, so you shouldn't have to worry there. Just mind that extra step. Sometimes you'll run into that. Just depends on when the board was manufactured. Now comes Ddr4 installation. This part's very straightforward. Only 2 DIMM slots here, so we're going to pull back on both tabs. We're going to align the notch in the first DIMM with the notch in the slot. We're going to slide it on in. We'll start with one side, push down pretty hard. You'll hear a click, and then push down on the other side. You'll hear the same click, and that DIMM should be installed with the exact same for slot number 2. I can't really see what I'm doing here, but there we go. That's the sound you want to hear. Now it's time to install our WD Black SN770. Remember, this is a PCIe 4.0 drive, hence transfer speeds upwards of 5,000 megabytes per second, and that's one of the reasons why we've chosen the platform that we have. I mean, sure, we could have gone cheaper, but then we'd be capping our NVMe at Gen 3 speed, so that's why, again, we paired it with a 5600X and a B550 motherboard. It wouldn't be the end of the world if we were just stuck with Gen 3, but, you know, I'm keen to test the full potential of this SN770, and so, you know, it makes sense to pick the platform that we did. Now, to install, it is again super simple. Just access the top M.2 slot. This is a very tiny board, so there's really only one visible here, but sometimes there's a slot on the back of the board if there's not one on the front. These are very small, so they have to make do with the space that they have. You're going to want to slide the drive into place, minding the key for correct orientation, and lock it in with an included Phillips screw. You should find this in your motherboard's box. That is literally all there is to it. Now you see what I'm talking about. Ease of installation, no cables necessary, and again, it's a super fast drive. Now this motherboard obviously comes with a very beefy heatsink, or well, it's not even really a heatsink, it's kind of like a metal slab that sits atop these M.2s, and they really don't do too much in the way of cooling. It does help a tad, but a proper heatsink with a fin stack would be a lot more beneficial. However, in the case of this SN770, I wanted to be a bit more representative because I understand that some motherboards out there don't include those kinds of, large metal slabs that sit atop these. So I'm going to leave it off for the sake of testing that you'll see later in this video, just to show you that it's still super fast. And then when we package it up and get it ready to ship to whoever wins this build, I'll have it reinstalled. I'm going to do a quick test fitment here of our platform. I'm starting to remember now the tolerances and clearances with this case. I think we're going to need to switch to an SFX PSU. I like the fact that the Silverstone case includes ATX PSU support, but what that does effectively is cut off top flow CPU cooler clearance. And I don't want this 5600X overheating for whoever happens to win the system. It is being given away, and that's, if it was just for me, I might be willing to put up with it, but I don't want this to be the first impression someone has when they, put this under load. So yeah, we're going to switch to probably an SF450 from Corsair. It's going to be smaller, and that'll give us plenty of clearance for the stock cooler that's included in the 5600X's box. So we're going to remove these here brackets, apply some thermal paste. I like the X pattern for these larger IHSs and Ryzen CPUs, and we're going to situate our stock AMD cooler. And you can see now, while we situate the platform once more, why we had to switch, because with this cooler as high as it is, and this isn't, this is still a low profile cooler in many respects. This is where the base of our ATX power supply would have sat. So yeah, we're talking a little over a centimeter worth of clearance. That ain't gonna cut it. We can't forget to tighten down the motherboard. All right, and you can see we've done a pretty good job here cable routing. I tried to keep these smaller cables out of the way as much as possible, use the stock cooler to kind of keep things in place, wedge cables between the DIMM slots and like the 24 pin, for example, all that good stuff. So yeah, about as clean as it's gonna get given the constraints of this case. The next thing we need to do is install the power supply, which should be, again, quite a bit easier, seeing as though we're switching to SFX. And then after that, we just need to install the graphics card, and then we're finished. We're finished with the build. We can turn it on and we can run some tests. By the way, yes, this is technically still a B-stock item, so we're gonna save a bit of money here, despite the fact that, again, SFX units are typically more expensive per unit wattage. Just look at how tiny this thing is. Oh my gosh, fits in the palm of my hand, no problem. I made the decision to install this PSU fan side up because we do have direct ventilation at the top of this case, and I don't want two competing components fighting for the same air. So if I flip this upside down, you'd have air being both pulled into the power supply and down into the CPU. And I'd rather just kind of separate things as is. We do have a fan up front, of course, that's going to provide fresh air. And with wiring looking pretty good, I think that there's plenty of breathing room you can see between the CPU cooler and the base of the power supply. The last thing to do then is install the graphics card. Now, I seemingly always do this with this particular case. I always overestimate the clearance for the graphics card. It's gonna be awfully close. I know it will fit because I fit a card very similar to this one dimensionally in here, but we do need to kind of finesse it a bit. I had to swap to a smaller 120 mil fan. We'll also need to partially remove this front panel to kind of wedge it in there. Swing it in on one side, and you've got to pull it to the back, kind of sort of align it, and then make sure that it clips into the board. There we go, and that is just a perfect fit. Tighten the front panel back down. Connect supplemental PCIe power, just barely. It's a very, very tight, awkward fit here. It's gonna pay off, trust me. I'm gonna focus on cable management for just a bit. I think it's crucial here because we do have this one fan up front that could snag some of these cables, so we're gonna make sure they're tightened down nicely so that that does not happen for whoever wins this. Well, here we are. This tiny little thing here. I love the way these ATX builds look. At the end of the day, they're just so compact and they pack one heck of a punch as well. And in this regard here, several different performance categories, I expect this to exceed our expectations. Based on what we paid, considering the state of the graphics card market especially, I think this is a pretty sweet deal, and the fact that we're able to package it up so tightly is very cool. So we need to attempt to power this on first, make sure that that it even turns on, and then we'll install Windows and we'll start running some tests. So now that we've verified this system actually works, not that we should be surprised or anything, it's time to put it through the ringer. First, a synthetic to test those sweet SN770 transfer speeds. So this is Crystal Disk Mark, and you can see with a 1 GB push, we've got sequential reads actually higher than what they're theoretically rated for, 5,227 megabytes per second, with writes following there behind at 4944. Again, if this doesn't explain how quick this drive is, I don't know what will. And for reference, a Gen 3 NVMe utilizing all 4 of its available lanes in an M.2 slot should cap out at around 4,000 megabytes per second, so we are easily exceeding that target here. Now let's try a practical application, game load times. GTA 5's always been one, in my opinion, that takes super long to load, and I'm curious how much faster this process is going to be. So you can see them side by side here. Wowee. I mean, it's as expected. We shouldn't be surprised here. The NVMe absolutely demolishes, and all this to demonstrate the actual advantages in-game that you'll notice by opting for a drive like this one. It won't improve your frame rate. That's not what faster drives can do. At least they shouldn't be able to do that. If they are improving them, then you have a serious problem with your old drive. But when it comes to game load times, the transitions in between sequences in game, that's where having a fast drive really counts. If you're at all impatient like me, trust me, you'll thank yourself for the upgrade. And in case you're wondering, for gaming in GTA 5, high settings and 1080p, this thing absolutely kills it. If you had a 165 Hz monitor, you could saturate that entire refresh rate with sweet frames, well over 100 FPS, in fact, well over 150 in most cases, with the exception of night shots, which tend to do a bit worse. Overall, though, I'd say, given the size of this build, it is mighty impressive. And we see this translated in 3D Mark Time Spy as well, which is more of a synthetic, but it gives us a good idea of where our system stacks up among the rest. With an overall score of 8935, we're averaging better than 58% of all submitted results. You see we're in that last peak, that sweet spot there, around 10,000 points or so. And again, this is DX12 and 1440p. So I think that, again, for the money we spend and for the size of the system, which is somewhat thermally constrained, we'll have to admit that. We're not using a super beefy cooler, we're not doing any manual overclocking. Being better than 58% of every submitted result out there, it's pretty darn good. And it's thanks to both our 5600X and our 5700 XT. It's funny, both these components, despite being in different product categories, have such similar names. Now again, I'd like to thank WD Black for partnering with us in this one. I hope you were able to take at least a few things away from the video, namely the fact that faster drives, yes, do matter, and you will be able to tell the difference. They won't magically improve your frame rate or anything, we're not promoting that, but they'll make the overall experience much snappier because loading screens and other in-game effects that have to be drawn from the storage drive in question aren't lagging behind. And when combined with a PCIe Gen 4 capable platform, the WD Black SN770 can fully flex its muscles. You can learn more about the WD Black SN770 by clicking the top link in this video's description. Now, one last matter of business to take care of, the giveaway. I did kind of leave you hanging there. Where to enter? It is in the video description. You'll see it'll say enter giveaway here, something like that. Click that link, you'll see the terms, you'll see who's allowed to enter, and I'm sure there will be more than at least 1 or 2 ways to enter, so you can increase your odds the more you do. We appreciate your support, we appreciate you watching this far into the video, and best of luck in that giveaway. If you enjoyed this one, consider subscribing if you have not already. Click that thumbs up and that bell notification icon, etc., etc. Leave a comment down below, and I'll catch you in the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for building with me.